unlike your co-panelist, Luke, you've at no stage in that statement made any attempt to talk about your own side having similar issues, which they do. Let me ask you, CJ, why are you so implacably reluctant to accept that anyone on your side has done anything wrong?
Yeah, I agree with what you said, Piers. Super sad, CJ, that immediately you're just sort of back to super divisive and dishonest talking points.
Piers Morgan just trotted out his latest pro-Trump, anti-Biden panel in the aftermath of the failed assassination attempt on Donald Trump. But in a stunning development, an absolute miracle occurred on that panel, and the person responsible is none other than my friend and yours, progressive political commentator Luke Beasley. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to talk about in this video. And by the way, I'm probably the happiest I've ever been making a video for this video, and which is stunning when you consider the bad political news that we have been inundated in the past several days, the past several weeks, the past several months, and the fact that it involves a Piers Morgan panel. But the reason I'm excited is because Luke Beasley is on this panel, my buddy. I've been trying to get him on this panel. I've been encouraging him to go on. It finally happened. He not only matched expectations, he exceeded them. And he did something so miraculous I've never seen any liberal or progressive commentator do on a Piers Morgan show. And that includes Mehdi Hasan and Destiny. So we're going to play some of these clips and unpack them together. But I'm excited for you to see this. And in this first clip, they're talking about rhetoric in the aftermath of the failed assassination attempt on Donald Trump.
Overwhelming reaction.
Joe Biden addressed the nation last night, but he didn't address comments he made to donors that were reported last week, where he said it's time to put a bullseye on Trump. As a Biden supporter, are you pretty horrified about that rhetoric? I'm not saying for a moment Trump hasn't used language that's been completely wrong as well, but simply the President of the United States using that kind of language literally days before somebody does put a bullseye on Trump seems at best extremely ill-advised and at worst dangerous.
Yeah, I think for everyone, this is causing us a little bit to reevaluate and do some introspection about how we speak about these things. I saw Congressman Dan Crenshaw mentioning we've gotten so used to speaking about politics as if it's a war, a battle, and all of these metaphors that align with that. As you mentioned, Biden is not an exception there. Very common, but I do think Biden should rethink. It seems like he is. He delivered a pretty strong and unifying message a couple times already about.
So this is important, okay? What Luke just did there was acknowledge that the Democrats have not been perfect in their rhetoric, okay? So he answered Piers Morgan's question directly, and probably in a way that I simply wouldn't. He was very gracious with it. I would have made sure to emphasize that the rhetoric on the Republican side is so much worse. But what Luke did here was brilliant, and it's about to pay dividends. Okay, so in response to that, in the aftermath, Piers Morgan turns his attention to a Republican commentator who was at the RNC, and this is what the Republican commentator had to say. And I want you to watch how Piers responds.
But it's an unsurprising one, especially when you look at the rhetoric of the left over the course of the past several years. They've equated Donald Trump to Hitler. They've demonized half of America. They tried to lock him up, and when that failed, now they tried to put a bullet inside of him. And this is the type of rhetoric that has just been commonplace in our politics. And I would go to say that Joe Biden is the exception, is not the exception, but he is the rule. You look at him saying that he wants to put a bullseye on the president. You look at Reid Hoffman saying that he wants to make Donald Trump a martyr. You then see the advisor to Reid Hoffman going out and sending an email to the press saying we should actually perpetuate the false narrative that this was all staged. The left has not learned their lesson. They continue to traffic in this rhetoric. And hopefully you would think that after Saturday, they would reevaluate what happened.
Okay, so unlike your co-panelist, Luke, you've at no stage in that statement made any attempt to talk about your own side having similar issues, which they do, or wanting unity and to bring people together here. And this, again, this is part of the problem, CJ, I think. Actually, I applaud Luke for what he said. He made no attempt to pretend that on the Democrat side, they're part of the problem. You've ignored the part of the problem which is clear and demonstrable, which is people on the right often do things just as bad as the stuff you've been detailing about the left. And
Luke Beasley just got Piers Morgan, the self-professed nonpartisan journalist who grades Donald Trump and the Republicans on an absurd curve that every panel about American politics is so obviously pro-Trump, pro-Republican, anti-Biden, anti-Democrat. The guy who stacks panels usually puts the one liberal up against either three conservatives or two conservatives and a progressive who hates the Democrats, whatever. And all of this in the aftermath of a failed assassination attempt on Trump. And Luke did so damn well that he got Piers Morgan to say, you know what? I'm actually going to devote time to calling out the Republican. Stunning. Of course, obviously, it goes saying that so much of what that Republican commentator said was ridiculous. President Biden has never demonized half the country. As a matter of fact, when he calls out MAGA Republicans, he goes out of his way to say, I'm not talking about all Republicans or even a majority of Republicans. The idea that it was a leftist assassin who attacked Donald Trump, based on the evidence we have, the person was a registered Republican whose classmates say was very conservative. Again, the investigation's ongoing, but this man has no basis to make the claims that he's making. But again, he can't help himself. And you can tell that Piers Morgan is actually fed up with it.
Okay.
I gotta jump in here.
I tried, Luke, so maybe you can directly challenge CJ Pearson.
Yeah, I agree with what you said, Piers. Super sad, CJ, that immediately you're just sort of back to super divisive and dishonest talking points. You said that people haven't pointed rifles
What's
at
dishonest, Luke,
Democrats?
about a member of the radical
let me
left?
say, Gabby, you remember Gabby Giffords? Gabby Giffords was shot, and then you also have more recently Paul Pelosi. I was curious.
Donald Trump president?
I was curious. Hey, I let you go for it. Let me. So Paul Pelosi was nearly killed by being bashed in the head with a hammer. And do you know what we heard in the aftermath of that? Unlike the response to this horrific attack on Trump, we saw people in positions of power within MAGA, like Trump himself and Don Jr., joking about this elderly man's head being bashed in with a hammer. And so I think I would feel weird with myself if I even walked out of this conversation allowing for the false equivalency. I agree, Piers, both sides need to be honest about roles they've played and be mindful of their language without completely ignoring important points we need to make. But also, there isn't an equivalence between the leaders. Yes, people online, I've seen some.
He's so good. So good. So proud of him. I think I'm going to play one more clip too, because of course, as this turns into a debate between Luke and CJ, want to play one more clip.
I think a lot more people probably follow him than a lot of the members of Congress you're citing here, right? And so what
CJ, why? Let me ask you, CJ, why are you so implacably reluctant to accept that anyone on your side has done anything wrong as part of this debate? Because I find that it's a very odd exhibition of defiance when you've had your own leader, Donald Trump, show a very.
There you have it, folks. This whole exchange is amazing. Luke did very well in the debate with CJ. But again, what I think is more important here is I want you to consider, because we've covered Piers Morgan panels so many times, whether you like it or not, he is an influential voice in media. He gets so many high-profile guests on, so many interesting dynamics and exchanges. He has a brilliant mind for this sort of thing. But it's also abundantly clear, even though he says, Piers, that he's nonpartisan, that he's not conservative, he has a bias towards Trump. We've established that. And it even gets down to the configuration of the very panels. He is very reluctant to put two outspoken Trump supporters versus two outspoken Democrats and have them relatively equally yoked. It's usually a 2v1, a 3v1, a 4v1 very often, with Piers coming in. Now, once you think about all that those biases, and also, again, add to the fact that there was a failed assassination attempt on Trump just days ago. So you would think that if Piers at any point were the least likely to criticize Republicans or to defend Democrats or to call out the divisive, corrosive rhetoric of the Republican Party, including Donald Trump, now would be the time. Like that his sympathy for Trump would be at its peak. But the way Luke answered these questions turned Piers against the Republican, and it effectively became a 2v1 against the Republican. A stunning performance. And that's why I'm so proud He's a personal friend of mine. He's been an enormous mentor, ironically enough, despite the age difference between us, and friend of this effort here at Pondering Politics. And he killed it. He just nailed it. He did so damn well. I encourage you guys to go to Piers Morgan's channel, Piers Morgan Uncensored, and watch this full thing, because even before Luke shows up, fascinating conversations. Wahaja Ali was on there. He gave a very forceful performance. And then Luke comes in here at the end and just knocks it out of the park. He is right to call out the false equivalence, and he does. Luke does a very good job. He's like, listen, I'm not going to create a false equivalence here. Yes, there is some irresponsible rhetoric on the Democratic side in terms of people on Twitter. But in terms of leaders, in terms of elected officials, they came out and unequivocally condemned the violence against Donald Trump. Publicly, unequivocally, unambiguously, in no uncertain terms. President Biden repeatedly addressed the nation and spoke to that effect as well. When Republicans engage in violence against Democrats, or when there is violence against Democrats by perhaps whatever the context is, maybe it's not a Republican always propagating the violence against the Democrats, but whenever a Democrat is a victim of violence, we see cheers, celebrations, mockery, derision from Republican leaders, from Donald Trump to Marjorie Taylor Greene to Don Jr. It's a proliferating attitude, and they try to impose a double standard where they get to mock and belittle and celebrate violence against people they don't like, but they demand the highest level of sympathy and civility when people they do like are the recipient of violence. And Luke was so good at calling that out. I definitely encourage you to check the whole thing out. Very proud of him. Let me know what you think in the comments about the miracle that Luke performed in front of your very eyes, getting Piers Morgan at the very least likely time to actually turn on the Republican Party. Let me know what you think in the comments.